So this is the object that we finished up in the glass studio, the Raven that will end up sitting onto the top of the slumped glass component. So when I do the cold working for this piece, we already formed and fitted the bottom section of this to match the curve of our glass slumping that we're going to do. But for this, I want to cold work down where we had our punty. And ideally, I like to go through the color as minimally as possible. And oftentimes, it depends too, partly on how I'm finishing the piece. But what I like to do is just lay out in duct tape on the edge of these larger sculpture punties. So that way, I am not as likely to go through the color right on the edge. I'm not super OCD about it, but I do like to set it up so that it just gives me a little bit of a mess up barrier. I don't know about most of you, but I generally need them. Now, if I'm not using the duct tape, or if I'm also taking it from, a punty all the way down to a high polish finish, then what I'll do is I'll work, and I use, usually I just use crayons, but any type of marker or crayon works. And in between each level of grinding, so between the 100, then to the 200, 300, all of that, what I'll do is each time I do it, I color over the surface of where I had ground. And the reason I do that is that helps me to see exactly where I'm at in terms of its completion of finish. That way I don't get all the way up to my pre-polish and look at it and be like, I have to go all the way back down to 220 because I didn't spend the time or notice that I had this part here that I had missed. Obviously wherever the color is from the previous previous level. So I'll do that where I'll go in and do that, color each level when I'm doing a cold working where it's coming back to a high polish. This one isn't coming back to a high polish. I'm just going to be taking it from the 120 up to the 360 because when it's finished, it will mount onto the piece like this and this won't be visible, but I do want it to have a fairly clean finish. So for the majority of, we'll set this off to the side for the moment, the majority of a lot of my cold working, I use my lathe. And so I'm going to set this up, my check lathe here. But first I wanted to just talk about putting the parts together. And the reason I do this sitting over here away from the machine is the last thing I want to do is drop any of this equipment because these are so precisely machined. I don't want to ding this. If I drop this sintered diamond wheel, I'm going to end up putting a big chip or ding in it. That's going to scratch my pieces and I've wasted a few $100s. Also, all my parts here are so tightly machined that I don't want them to fall, bend, or break. It's brass and it works really well. So again, I'm setting it up. I always set it up flat like that first, so that way I don't have to worry about it falling. But the other thing is, on the edge here, I have engraved out with an arrow. The reason I have that is I always want this turning in the same direction because the brass is a softer metal, and what it does is it helps, as it wears back, helps to expose the diamond so that we grind through that. If we had a hard metal, then the diamond would wear down, we wouldn't be able to get more of it. And so I always want this to stay going in the same direction. So I turn it so that my outside is facing to the out of the machine. Then I put my washer in so that I sit level, and I lightly put on my cap to lock things into place. At this point, I'm going to move over to the lathe, and we're going to attach it onto the arm. We had assembled all these parts together before bringing it on so that we didn't drop or damage them. At this point, I put in the locking pin, and I will tighten it down by hand, and then I will take my wrench, And I don't want to crank it down, but I do want to make sure it's snug, so I just give it a little half turn like that to lock it into place. This allows me now to have this secured and turning nice and clean. When I'm setting up, I want to make sure that I have my water feed going down where I need it. Right now, I'm a little bit out, so I'm going to just slide the tray back so that I have water coming down onto here. This way I can work at this level. If I needed to, I have this armrest here that I can use to set my arms on as I'm stable. Usually when I'm carving or grinding into work patterns, I'll do that. Today we won't need it because the piece I'm doing doesn't require that stability, but this allows me to work around the piece in a nice open tray. We've got our piece running. It's a nice quiet machine, which is one of the great things about this. But what we're gonna do now is we've got this glass that's left from our sculpture punty that we want to take back so this sits in a clean level against the other glass. So when I'm carving into this, I don't want to be pushing so hard that it's chewing into it, but what I'm going to do is just work around from the edges down, and I don't want to get right to the edge, but I do want to come up just near the edge as cleanly as possible. So I'm not aggressively forcing this in, it's just the mild weight of the piece itself with a little bit of pressure in. And as you can see, it's starting to take that part down. So I go back through and I'll check where I'm at after every so many times on here. And now you can see why I use the duct tape. It does help to just give you a slight little buffer. So when you run over, what you'll hear is a difference. I'll even do it where it sounds different. It's also not cutting into my black glass on the surface. The other thing is I don't often wear headphones when I'm doing this, and especially when starting out, I encourage students not to, and I don't let them wear earphones when they're doing this. They can wear ear muffs or ear protection, but I don't want them listening to music while they're on here, because what I want them to really do is to hear the difference as you go through sections. The amount of information you can gain from just listening to what you're doing while cold working is a very, very valuable skill. So here you can see where it had chipped a little bit on the punty, which is, it's okay because of the way that this is gonna sit. That's not gonna be a noticeable issue. But here's where you can see what happens when you start to go through your initial layer of color. Now you can see a little bit of a rough edge there. I'm gonna take, like I said, I take this down to just at the edge of where the glass, the clear glass sits to the color, but I don't want to take it all the way down because again, this is a very aggressive wheel. So I don't want to take it to the point where it's going to start digging in and cutting into the color on my glass. But as you can hear, it does get close to the duct tape. And again, that's why I use it there as just a little bit of protection so I don't end up with a big, completely blue section there. So again, you can see it's ground a little bit onto the tape, but we're good. So now I'm gonna end up switching over to a different wheel, which is a little bit softer wheel, a little higher polish on it. We'll go up to the 360. So, you know, if it doesn't want to pop free, you know, just come loose. I use a leather mallet. It's actually an old jewelry tool, but I'll hold on to it and I'll just give it a light little tap. Nothing harder than I would hit an apple with it if I didn't want to damage the apple, but it gives it just enough movement that it pops off, and I can go over to the table, set it down level, and take the piece apart. So this is a different type of wheel, a little less expensive of a wheel, works great, but it's a 360 grit. Obviously, just like with wood or metal, the higher the number, the cleaner the polish. Again, same thing, I like to set this up before I go over there. I'll set on. I also have the outside and the direction that this will be turning. But again, given the precision with which these are machined to, I want to make sure that I have the piece put together and I'm not dropping or damaging any of the equipment. This goes on very similar, and we'll step over to the lathe to go through that. So we've now set a little screw insert that this will then thread onto. Okay, once we get to that point, I will take the two washers, and again, I'll turn it the other direction so that it locks instead of opening it. But I just give it a little half turn and we're locked into place. You can see how rough that finish is there. I want it a little bit cleaner. So now I'll come with my 360 and I work back across everywhere that I was just grinding as well out to the edge. You know, if I need a little more water, I'll add just a hair more. And what I'll do now is I'll take off my duct tape so I can see where my edges are. Okay, I'm clean all through here. I don't want to get down in there anymore, but I do need to come and get a little bit more up on that top edge. Now, because this is attaching to another piece, I can be a little less careful at that point, but I also don't want to be coming all the way down to where it's a perfectly cleaned up edge. There's a little divot there, so that lip right there that I can catch with my fingernail is going to stay on there, but that is okay because we've got it polished back to a point where it doesn't become visually a visual issue with the piece. Just one little section there left. And we are done setting this up. So we've gotten our bird is all ground back, and this is where I will use a sign resist that I can then draw on and get it laid out so that we can use a sandblaster to carve through this initial layer of black down to the blue that we put on underneath it. I like to use Buttercut, which is a 3M product. The reason I like the Buttercut is the flexibility of it and the malleability around the curved surface. There's a lot of other different types of sign resist or rubberized tapings that you can use, and all of them work fine and have their pluses and minuses. I'm just really comfortable with the Buttercut, and that's my biggest reason for using it. So when I set it out, I always like to just check it. I'm going to end up coming around the piece like this, but I set it up one, I want to make sure it's where I need it. Then I'm going to flip it over, and we're going to attach it on here. Now, again, as I said, the thing I like about the Buttercut is its flexibility and malleability to go around curved edges. And there's a little trick, you know, it's not rocket science, but it's a little trick that works really well to get around that curved edge. When you're taking it off its tape, you want to be careful if you stick it to itself on the tacky edge, it will not come apart and you'll just have wasted some money. I have my tacky side, I have my non-tacky side. What I'll do is I'll line it up, okay? And I don't start smoothing it on or right off the get-go, I get it started. But what I'll do is I'll pick my high edge that I want to start with, in this case this wing, and I start just smoothing that down. I'll kind of release a little bit on that edge, but I want to work it down in between so that it sits in there and I don't have big air pockets. So I use my finger to just kind of work that down. I'll push out any little air bubbles or air pockets as I'm working it. And I come up again on the other high point and I start to clean it down and around. Now, if you notice, I've got a high point right there where it's going to, I couldn't leave that as such and get a good pattern on my piece. I'll also get points all the way around to the edge. So the way I work around that is, and again, I will do this whole bottom edge here to get to the point I want, because I want to make sure that I'm wasting as little as possible, and I've got it set up the way I need it to be. Again, we'll come to this side, we'll do a similar thing, because I don't want it to end up sticking back on something. And I'll find what's going to be my easiest cuts, and I can make some adjustments based on that. Right up at the top here, I have some points. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to take from the back there, I'm just going to do a straight line all the way out to the edge. Lift this edge up, smooth one side down so that I don't have any air pockets underneath. Then I'll take the other side and I'll lay it over top. Smooth it all the way down. I'll do the same now right here. I'm going to start, work it down and around. I've cut to create that seam. I smooth it all down and then I go over top of it to smooth it back. I have one more seam there that I'll create. Right down the center, overlay that point. Then we'll come back and we'll do this edge. I'll start again in the center, all the way out. I'm going to start on the inside edge. I peel that back so that I can lay that down into a nice smooth fit. Then I'll come back over top, smooth that down, and it'll work out nice and clean and lays down. So now we've got one side laid down smooth. We'll finish this other side here. Again, we're on the back edge. It's always best if you can get a straight line versus a curved. You end up with a much cleaner finish to the piece. I don't want to leave these in that same overlaying sections like that, because when I cut that out, that's going to create a different depth. I'm not going to have the same cleanliness, and I'm more likely to have the sand go underneath that or to lift that off. So the way I work through that is, and we'll do it on this bottom one here, you can see, is I'll start right in the center from that line, and I come all the way out to that edge. I can peel this section back. I can then peel the bottom section that I've cut to release. And now I can work it back and have a nice, seamless, clean edge between the two. I've got almost no seam there. When I'm laying out my pattern and done, I can always go back over and add a second strip on there. So I've got a clean, seamless finish, but I don't want to have underneath, at the bottom, have a big seam and depth distance. And so I'll go around the whole piece and do that. Like I said, the nice thing I like about the butter cut is that it allows me to work on the curved surface really cleanly and to get all the way around a nice clean edge. So again, I'll lift that up. I'll peel the underneath edge back. And then it's just a matter of laying it down and pushing with my right thumb up and into place and my left thumb across the top so I get a nice clean seam on there.